Hi, Jan.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm just playing around with this. I've got the preamble so I can put it up for you, and I don't need.
And then I did have a question. I turn it over to staff to call roll and then the meeting preamble, right?
Yes. Well, let me look at that. Let me just look at it for my own edification and make sure.
It's one way on the agenda, and then it's another way on the online meeting process. But I can just follow the agenda.
What happened to the agenda? I lost my agenda. I still don't have these screen shares figured out all that well. That's odd. I lost it. Oh, wait, actually, I didn't lose it. It's a PDF, right? Yep. There we go. Are you ready to run the meeting?
I think so, yeah.
Are you nervous at all?
Not really, no. I mean, I want to make sure that I get everything that I need to, but I reviewed the documents and it seems pretty straightforward.
Oh, good. Can you see the agenda on the screen?
No, what I see is like a word screen, like it looks like you're about to open something, but it's not open yet. Or maybe it's an Outlook screen. Sorry, I can't quite tell.
Weird. So interesting. I get so frustrated with this, with me. Okay, let me try again. Okay, now you should be able to see the agenda, right?
Yeah, now I can see it.
Okay. And then, so the agenda says, yes, we'll do the call to order. I'll do the roll call, then you do the reading of the preamble. And
Okay.
then I'll put I didn't have the minutes up last time. I couldn't even pull, didn't have them accessible to pull up, but I have them accessible to pull up this time, so I can put the minutes up if need be.
Okay. And then with Mike being absent, do I need to acknowledge that? And there'll need to be a motion to excuse his absence. Is that right?
How are we doing that? His absence is excused. I haven't heard from anybody else. So I think when you do roll call, let's see if we have let's see. Because we wait until the end, but I'm thinking, that I can ask Steve, we can ask Steve if we need to, but I was thinking, like, when we do the roll call, we know Mike is excused, and we know also that Commissioner Freyer has been. So I don't know if when we do the roll call that we just indicate that, because we've received, it's the ones that are late that we determine what to do, that never show up, isn't it?
I'm trying to remember because we did this last time, and then let's see, one of the
Kind of do it differently all the time. One of the things, just since you and I are on right now, I don't know if were you there last time?
At the last meeting, I was.
Did you pick up on Commissioner Ramos? He said it politely, but he said that it would be better structure for comment. Could there be a better structure for comments during presentations? And he thought that there would be designated times that commissioners could comment. And I have it up here I pulled it up on the minutes. And I think he was frustrated because he said, as the presentation was happening, commissioners started jumping in and different things. So I'm wondering if you may want to consider reminding commissioners to hold off on their questions until the end of the presentation.
Yeah, I can do that. And Mike and I did our chair and vice chair training with Kevin, and we talked a little bit about that and just kind of like how to make sure everyone's getting equitable time to speak.
Oh, good. Oh, so you guys covered that. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, but I can do that. I'll do that maybe after the roll call. I'll just do a reminder before we move into the action items, or after the minutes before we move into the action items.
Okay, before you move in and, or maybe right after you do the preamble?
Yeah.
Okay,
And
maybe that would
then
be your trigger time.
let's see. So with the two informational items, is city staff presenting and then we have time for discussion, or is it just discussion on the Westside Bike Mobility Project?
No, I think there's an allotment for conversation for the TSP plus the West Side. I think they've made schedule with, we can confirm this with Anna, but I believe that she's made sure that the presenters know that we need to have time for discussion.
But there are presenters for both of those, right?
Yes,
Okay, perfect.
And did you see that we did get a public written testimony?
I saw one that came in just a few minutes ago about.
They sent it at 2, a little after 2, but what happens is I shut down and I come over here to City Hall because I work from home. So between the time I left and I got all set up and checking emails again. So, but I responded to the person because he followed up to make sure I'd gotten it, and I explained to him that we've had so many, we don't happen to have it this time, but we've been having so many testimonies, written testimonies. We just acknowledge that they're received and that the commissioners have seen them, and then they're put into public record, and then we attach them to the minutes if we have them.
Okay. And I know we talked about this last time as well, but do we need to vote on adopting that public written comment into the record, or does that just happen automatically?
I think what we decided, if I recall correctly, you just acknowledge that they've been received, and then you take a vote to accept it into public record.
Okay, and should we just take that vote like right after the meeting minutes? From the previous meeting, I mean.
Well, I think the one that I have is for today, so I think it would be down toward public comment. I'm
Okay,
guessing.
that makes sense. Yeah, so after we do our action items and then we have public comment, and then we can take a vote to accept the written ones into the record.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's what I would suggest.
And then the only other question I had is with the citizen communication, the city staff kind of runs that, right? And you have the people queued up in order and you'll call on them and let them know when they're hitting their 3 minutes.
Yes. Exactly. So what I'm doing is I'm working the chat box with them, and I call them. So I kind of make sure they're there, but I call them. That's when I promote them up to panelists, ask them to unmute themselves and turn on their video camera. They're to say their name, where they live, and then at that point their 3 minutes starts, and I time them, and at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, I let them know that they have 30 seconds left.
Okay, perfect.
Because there's no clock for them to watch to help them gauge themselves on how much time they're taking. So unless they think to do their own timer at home then, or wherever they're at, then it's kind of hard to track how much time you've taken. And then when the timer goes off at 3 minutes, because you can hear it on my phone, then you can just kind of, let them kind of wrap up, and say, okay, well, your time is up. Did you want to wrap up with a comment? And then, I'll flip them back to attendee and get the next ones on. We have, let's see, right now, as of now, I have 2, possibly 3. I was supposed to get somebody on last meeting. It was something we had told her we would do, and because she didn't redo a public comment request, it didn't, my memory wasn't jogged, and so we overlooked her. And so I reached out to her today to invite her to go ahead and make public comment if she wanted to. I'm not sure she wants to, but she has her son's birthday dinner or something around the same time. So I'm not sure if she's going to be able to join us. So if she does, we'll have 3 people. If not, we'll just have the 2.
Okay.
That's where we're at with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a minute. I'm going to run to the restroom. Did you need anything else before I do that?
No, go ahead. I'm going to step out for a couple minutes and like get water and run to the restroom too.
Sounds good. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, Jen, how's it going?
Good. How are
Not too
you?
bad.
Good. Hey, Michelle.
Yeah.
I'm hoping David join. I don't know why I want to call David Steve. David joins us soon. Oh, Anna's on. Maybe I'll ask Anna. Hey, Anna.
Hey, how's it
Hi.
going?
Good, thank you. Quick question. Just a point of clarification. I have a citizen who sent in public testimony. I forwarded it to everybody at 3-something. But he wants it read out loud. And what I had explained to him is we usually just say, because we've been having so many, instead of reading them out loud, we just indicate that the commissioners have received them and we put them into public record. We just have one written testimony today, and he wants to have it read out loud. Well, he doesn't know we have just one, but he wanted to clarify if it's not going to be read out loud, he wants to also make public comment. So would you suggest we just go ahead and read it out loud, or do you want to give him 3 minutes for public comment and also accept his written testimony in the record?
I mean, I'm not sure what David would say, but is he saying that he would prefer for the testimony to be read out loud and to not make verbal testimony? Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, he feels like what he wrote is sufficient, and as long as it's read out loud. Otherwise, he wants to speak.
Okay, so he doesn't necessarily want to speak. He would prefer for his testimony to be read out loud.
I think so. Gathering he said, you know. So I just think we just have one. Do we want to read it out loud? And Michelle just needs to know, so.
I mean, I don't see an issue with that. I don't know if David would have an issue with it, so I think it's worth asking David when he gets on, but I don't have any issue with that. I don't.
Okay, and since we just have one, I think we've done it for the expediency of time since we've had so many.
Yeah.
And so since we just have one, I'm thinking it should be okay.
Yeah. I mean, seems like to me that would be fine.
Okay.
And then just to clarify, will one of the staff members read that, or is that something that I'll read?
I think it's something you would read.
Okay, that's fine. Also, I'll do that at the
Would you
end.
agree? Would you concur, Anna?
I honestly don't know. Sorry, I'm not an expert on meeting
Am I?
process. I would assume that since it's addressed to the TMC, that
If David gets on in time before the meeting starts, we can ask him. And we can even ask him in the meeting. Should she read it? Who needs to read it? We'll just do
yeah,
that.
we can ask David. I think
Yeah.
that would be the most appropriate thing to do. Yeah, I'm sorry that I don't know the answer, but we'll all learn the answer.
Yeah, there we go. I don't know the answer either. That's why I was crisscrossing my fingers hoping you did.
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
Okay. No worries. I'm just gonna let him know we're gonna read it out loud. Do you have that available, Michelle, just in case?
I do. I have the email open, so just let me know if we are able to read it out loud, and I can read that after we go through the folks who are in the chat for public comment.
Okay.
Sound check, sound check.
Hello, we hear you.
Let's try again. Does anybody hear me out there?
Yep, we can all hear you.
Excellent, thank you.
Can you guys see the meeting minutes that is up right now?
Yes,
And is that all you see, is that?
yes. Well,
Okay.
people.
Good. I'm gonna switch it though to the agenda. Okay, it's 4 o'clock and I haven't started the webinar yet, but I'm going to go ahead and start it so that attendees can join as well.
Okay, and we'll just give folks a couple more minutes to get logged in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. In legislative matters, the role of the commission is advisory. The Planning Commission may hold separate meetings to consider our recommendations and provide their own, and City Council may also hold separate meetings to consider our recommendation and make a final determination. During tonight's meeting, please do not use the chat box for public comment. Comments made in the chat box are not included in the public record. Commission members will not comment on or take into consideration any comments made in the chat box. There are two primary functions of the chat box. First is for staff to coordinate with you if you've signed up for public comment. Second, to notify staff of any technical issues. The Transportation and Mobility Commission will conduct a meeting tonight and take public comments during designated times. Any written testimony received by 2 p.m. will be read and to the record by staff. Callers who have pre-registered by 2 p.m. on the Transportation and Mobility Commission survey page will be called upon to address the Transportation and Mobility Commission. When you are called, we will promote you from webinar attendee to panelist. Please make sure your phone or microphone is unmuted and your video is turned on so your face can be seen during your testimony. At that time, state your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes for your comments. Staff will alert you when you have 30 seconds left. At the conclusion of your 3 minutes, staff will transition you back to webinar attendees so you can continue to watch the meeting. If you are providing the formal recommendation of a neighborhood association or other group, please tell us when the association voted on that matter, as well as how many people were for and against. Please keep remarks brief and to the point. Remarks should be directed to the Transportation and Mobility Commission as a body, not to the audience or staff. Please do not repeat comments that have already been provided in print or verbally. Please show respect for the people commenting tonight, whether or not you agree with their comments. All right. So with all of that said, I do want to move into the meeting minutes from the previous meeting and just ask if there was any discussion or clarification from any of the commissioners on the meeting minutes.
The only thing I noted is that Commissioner Reyes' name was misspelled at one point. Pretty trivial thing. I mean, not to you, Mario, I'm sure, but
It's fine.
Can we have a motion to correct the spelling of Commissioner Reyes' name?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Williams a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I can take the motion and take the vote.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hardy,
Aye.
Commissioner Herman,
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson,
Aye.
Commissioner McKenzie,
Aye.
Commissioner Ramos.
Aye.
Commissioner Ruggles,
I see her, but she's not voting. We can't hear you.
she's not muted. I'm not sure.
I
Just
saw-
give us a thumbs up. I believe that means she's voting in the affirmative.
Do you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay,
Yes.
I didn't realize I was on the microphone. Pardon me. Okay, got it.
Okay. Commissioner Williams
Yes.
and Commissioner Rea.
Yes.
All right.
So this is before we go too much farther. Is it necessary to do roll call on something like a misspelling?
Apparently.
I'm gonna turn that to city staff or for,
Yeah, Chair, if I could address that.
Imagine, but it's-
yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. So it is important anytime you are voting on anything, and whether it's a motion to amend the minutes or whether it's a motion to take action on something, in order to make sure that we have an accurate record, especially when we're all in this remote platform, the best way for staff as, as recording this for posterity is to go ahead and do this process. It may seem a little laborious, but it's the best way we have of ensuring a public record, which as a body subject to the OPMA, that it's something you really need to focus on. So it may seem cumbersome, but for this, it is important. So yeah.
In the future, could we do it all as one? Say we'd like to correct the spelling and adopt the minutes?
Typically, if you have a motion to amend something, whether it's to amend a motion that's pending or whether it's to amend the minutes, that all has to be a two-step process. If we were all in person, it may seem a little easier, but it does, when you're talking about parliamentary procedure, it really behooves us to go ahead and take that extra step and do it this way.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do we have any further discussion on the meeting minutes?
Chair, do we need to make a motion to approve the minutes now?
Yeah, if there's no further discussion, I will ask for a motion to approve
That would
Okay.
be to approve as amended, just
as amended. Thank you.
whoever's making the motion.
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Do we have a second?
I'll second. Commissioner Jackson.
Can I have city staff take the vote, please?
Yes. Okay, let's see here. Commissioner Hardy,
Aye.
Commissioner McKenzie,
Aye.
Commissioner
Yes.
Rea, Commissioner Ramos,
Yes.
Commissioner Ruggles,
Yes.
Commissioner
Yes.
Williams, Commissioner Jackson, and Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Excellent. So the meeting minutes will be adopted into the record. We do have a couple of informational items on the agenda tonight. Before we move into those, I just want to ask, kind of per the meeting minutes and the discussion last time, that all of us as commissioners hold our comments until the end of the presentation, and that once we do get to the end of the presentation, you kind of indicate that you'd like to speak by either raising your hand or using the hand raise button in the chat feature, just so that we can make sure that all the commissioners are getting equal space to speak. And I will do my best to kind of make sure that we're balancing that and acknowledging folks who maybe haven't spoken if some folks have already spoken. If we do need to extend, we can have the discussion at that point, but that is what I would ask on the front end. And with that, I will turn it back over to city staff to move into the transportation system plan update.
Jen, would you like me to share my screen or?
Anna,
Yes, Jan?
are you introducing or?
Oh, I can introduce them.
Okay,
So as per request, we didn't get through the presentation on the transportation system plan update from January 2021. And so our consultant Nelson Nygaard, so Stephanie Wright with Nelson Nygaard, is going to finish up that presentation.
and where are we starting?
43. Hey everyone, nice to see everyone again. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming back.
So we sort of ran out of time a couple months ago to get through. We were presenting on existing conditions, and so to keep going, a couple more. We had
Couple more?
just talked about transit. Okay, right there. It's perfect, Jen. Thank you.
Okay.
So shall I just tell you next?
Yes, I was looking, trying to give you the controls, but here, I'm going to make you a host. There we go. You should be able to take over now.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we were just diving into driving, and we had gone through a little bit of this content, but at this point, I got the 5-minute warning or 2-minute warning, so we really sped through it pretty quick. So I'm just going to start back here at the start of the driving section. So I don't know if I can advance.
Do you want me just to go ahead and do it?
Yeah, that might be easier.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. You want me to advance? And I don't mind. Do you?
Okay. Okay.
Is this
Yeah,
where we
no,
are? You want me to
right
keep
there.
going?
That's
Okay.
perfect. Right where you are right now.
Okay.
So we're starting to look at the street network. A lot of the ways that we initially start thinking about the different functions that the streets provide for us is something called functional classification. And so that is a system of dividing up streets based on whether they serve more of an access purpose, like to the street outside your house, or a mobility purpose, like some of the major arterials like Fourth Plane or Mill Plane. And so this is just an overview of showing what the functional classification currently is. It is a federal classification system. So principal arterials, so there's dark, heavy blue lines, Fourth Plane, Mill Plane, Main Street. Those are part of the federal highway system. So that is a very specific designation. And then you go down to your collector streets, where your more local access and your local neighborhood streets. Go to the next. And so one of the things that we're facing a unique challenge / I guess also opportunity is looking at how travel volumes change when you have a something like a pandemic happening. And so this is an ongoing effort where we are using data from what's called a location-based services vendor called Streetlight, looking at how trip patterns and volumes have changed during COVID. And so this is just a snapshot. We produced this existing conditions work back in August of 2020. So there's a little timeline showing the data that we had available at that time of looking at how traffic volumes have changed, in particular looking at those key access points into the city. And so while the transportation system plan will not cover the interstate system, it is still known that these are the two main entrance points of the system. And we were just sort of wanting to take an initial pass at whether behaviors had changed and how much. And so each of those big bubbles shows how much volumes have reduced during different phases of the stay-at-home order. So the orange bar, the red bar correspond to about when things like really shut down heavily in late March. And so at both entrance points, the volumes decreased by about the same amount, so 34% on I-5 and 40% on 205. And then slowly started coming back up, so you see things starting to reopen. And then by the end of July, volumes were still down by about 15 to 16% at each of those locations. So if you go to the next one.
How has that shifted through the second half of the year?
I don't have the.
Sorry, Commissioner Ray. I am going to ask everyone to kind of note your questions as we go through it, and then we'll have time for that at the end.
Okay, so if you go to the next page. So when we are looking at the performance of the system from the driver perspective, so one of the things people usually want to talk about is congestion or travel times or travel speeds. And so there's a couple of key metrics that the city tracks on major corridors throughout the city. And this is showing one of those metrics, which is the travel speed. And the target for the travel speed, and this is during the peak hours, is 10 to 12 miles an hour. And so you might be wondering, okay, well, that's not what the speed limit is. And so this acknowledges that congestion is a part of life and it is a part of rush hour. And also that there are other trade-offs when you have traffic moving at faster speeds. It becomes less comfortable for walking, for biking. And so 10 to 12 miles an hour is actually a target set by RTC, the regional governance. And so this map just shows whether or not these key corridors are above or below that target. And currently, well, pre-COVID, all of the travel corridors were actually operating above the target. So they were at faster than 10 to 12 miles an hour. So go to the next page. So another thing people are usually wanting to know about is, well, how fast am I traveling on these corridors? And so travel time index is another metric that's used to assess these key corridors. And it takes the ratio of the amount of time it takes to travel the corridor during a peak period versus, you know, like the middle of the night or free flow. So if the ratio is greater than 1, it just means it takes longer during the rush hour than during non-rush hour. And as you can see, the red is all the way up to a ratio of 2, which would mean it takes twice as long to travel that corridor during rush hour versus non-rush hour or free flow. And so I think what's interesting to note here is the corridors that are facing high travel time ratios in both directions are like Mill Plain, 4th Lane, 112. And then there are some corridors where you can see that the congestion, like on Anderson Road, is really in one direction versus the other. And this is just showing afternoon rush hour. So go to the next page. No, other way. There you go. So the street grid is sort of our baseline to work with. So particularly when you think about walking and biking, this is like our baseline of where we can put bike facilities or pedestrian facilities, and it's where we currently have our driving network. And so the design of that grid really influences how we can think about implementing multimodal transportation. And so at the top left is just a few examples, kind of plan diagrams of how different grids look. So you might see in a downtown area like downtown Vancouver, the streets are gridded, you know, the blocks are short. You can kind of look down the street and see where you're going to go. And then all the way to a more like curvilinear pattern where you have cul-de-sacs, you have one main road, and then off of that are several smaller residential streets. And so what we find a lot of times in doing these projects is that people are looking for alternate routes for different modes. And that's a great option, but it really depends on what network you have to work with. So we find there's a lot of places where there's not many parallel options. And so a lot of the traffic or all the demand by any mode has to travel on some of these main streets. And this is on the bottom left is just an example. So this is near Fisher's Landing, where, you know, if someone living in this community in the upper left wanted to walk to Fred Meyer, they cannot, there's actually a wall blocking off the access to the northwest corner of that intersection, and you would have to walk quite a far distance to get to something that's really not that far away. And we recognize that there are other reasons why communities choose to not be connected. So this is just showing you what the trade-offs and the outcomes are of the decisions on how to build the street grid. So go to the next slide. So what this map shows, this is the GIS analysis on looking at how many intersections there are per quarter mile. So if you think about block length is one of the key kind of factors that influences walkability. So the ability to get to a place, turn a corner, cross the street. And so the density of intersections correlates somewhat to walkability and bikeability. And the darker the green is where we have more and more intersections. And so you can see places like downtown has a heavy concentration of an area that is probably pretty walkable. And there are walkable areas sprinkled all throughout the city. I think the places that are shown in yellow are the places that are less walkable. And I think some of the things that are notable are some of the major destinations like the mall, Columbia Tech Center, aren't super walkable. So these are places that a lot of people need to get to somehow, but are probably really only comfortable to get to by driving. Let's go to the next slide. So the city also manages a number of parking spaces, so 3,900 parking spaces. That includes both on the street as well as in structures. And so the demand for parking is kind of interesting. This was from a 2017 parking study that the city sponsored. And so what the maps show is the amount of parking that's being utilized by different times of day. And so on average, the parking spaces are generally like 60% available, but the trend is that top left diagram is showing Thursday morning, there's not a lot of red, which is where the parking is heavily occupied. And then by Thursday afternoon, you start to see all this red pop up. And then by Thursday evening, there's a lot of red. So what this study concluded was, you know, there's a lot of demand coming downtown actually in the evening, more so than for commuting purposes. So the on-street parking fills up at night for people coming to restaurants, events, etc. And this was also taken, this sample was from a summer weekday. So even more demand to come downtown and hang out on the waterfront and such. So the next one. So transportation demand management is sort of a suite of policies, incentives that sort of complement the hard infrastructure of the transportation network and offer options for people to not drive, basically. And so it includes, if you think of things like transit passes or bike parking at work, or all these little things that add up to make it easier for you to carpool, walk, bike, or telecommute. And so a few of the programs that the city or the region already are promoting, including things like information and ride sharing. C-Tran provides van pools. And then there's also something called the Commute Trip Reduction Program, which is actually a state law that mandates that large employers have to have some kind of plan in place to reduce the amount of people who are driving alone to work. And so in the city of Vancouver, there's 38 employers that are large enough to trigger that commute trip reduction law, and that affects about 19,000 employees. And so the little graphs on the right show the how those employees have been getting to work over time. And so driving alone has actually increased even for those employers who are part of the commute trip reduction program. The little graph on the bottom, the yellow line shows telework, which was already going up. And the last date that we had available was 2018. But as you know, that has like skyrocketed now with COVID, but it was already on the upward trend even before. So I think there's still some work to do on getting the incentives in place that could help drive some of these drive alone rates down. Okay, so next. Okay, so now we have the discussion. So any of this information surprise you about the conditions for driving in Vancouver? And I think we talked about this a little bit last time, but how do you think that COVID will require us to think differently about how we use the street system?
Sorry, but we're not allowed to answer any questions until your presentation is over.
Okay.
I would welcome all the commissioners to respond to these questions. And so if Stephanie is done, we can also have further discussion. We've got about 20 minutes.
Yeah, there's a little bit about community outreach, but I think we should just go ahead and whilst this material is fresh, because I think I think I'm supposed to end at 4:45. So go for it.
Well, I think the one thing I think about the post-COVID thing is that it just makes me think that if there's a possibility, if something changes, then we can come up with other ways of getting around. And I like the idea of making it more making it easier for people to get around in multiple ways.
Chair, can I interject really quickly?
Sure.
If I could remind the members, it is really going to help if you, before you speak, be recognized by the chair.
Sorry. Oh, yes.
Yeah, and then that way the chair can say, "Oh, Commissioner Ruggles," and we're all clear as to who's talking and who's saying what, and nobody's talking over each other. So, thank you.
Thank you, David.
All right. Do we have any other comment? And thanks everyone for bearing with us in this. I know it's a little awkward over Zoom, but we just want to make sure that we all have a chance to speak. Commissioner Rea?
I raised my hand, but no one saw that, so I literally raised my hand. That seemed to do the trick. So your data covered us through about halfway through 2020. I'm curious if you have any updated data since then.
Yes. So we had to do a sort of cut off the existing conditions at a certain point, and we focus more on what is out there. So infrastructure, assets. And so we are working on a follow-up, like a companion document to existing conditions that looks deeper at the data we're getting from Streetlight going through October of 2020 is what the last set we got. So I don't have the findings here for you right now, but I just will tell you that one of the different lenses we're trying to take is looking at the data from an equity perspective and seeing where trip patterns are happening. That might be those of essential employees, trips taken on transit, where people are traveling to and from in areas that we've identified as having a high equity need, so high economic vulnerability. And so that has been interesting to see. And I think one of the interesting trends I saw was a lot of the communities that are living in the areas that we're seeing as having a high equity need aren't necessarily traveling downtown. So we're seeing a lot of travel between this kind of the central part of the city, between I-5 and 205 to the east and vice versa, but not so much of people coming downtown. And so it sort of throws the paradigm of the downtown being a focus on its head. That's not necessarily true, and that the trip patterns are more focused in the between the neighborhoods. So yeah, I don't have the numbers to give to you, but yes, we are looking at a data set that goes farther than June of 2020.
Commissioner Williams, and then we'll go back to Commissioner Rea.
Ismail, I think probably everybody's been reading the same kind of articles, but my surmise is that the standard work week, particularly in the professional class, will change such that maybe a person works from home 2 days a week and goes to the office 3 days a week, just making stuff up. Clearly, if you're in the trades, you're going to work. You know, that's not going to change. So as I can imagine, there might be some subtle things, but I thought it was very interesting how the downtown parking was more utilized in the evening hours, and I can only imagine that that's going to continue as more and more restaurants and such are being built, or because they will be back, is my prediction.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's go back to Commissioner Rea.
I wouldn't expect a lot of travel downtown, as an example, if restaurants and other entertainment venues are closed or severely limited. That would discourage people. So my concern is that we may have unrealistically low numbers due to the fact that these businesses were shut down, and we might see a significant increase in demand as they are opened back up, and that could skew our numbers significantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
Commissioner Jackson.
I would just like to say, as somebody sitting down here, that there's a lot of office space that I just don't think is going to be utilized after this is over. So I do think that's one thing that is going to change. It is kind of a ghost town down here during the days.
Is there anyone else that wanted to kind of comment that I haven't recognized yet? All right, thanks everyone, and we'll turn it back over to Stephanie Wright to finish up, and then we can do any additional commentary at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Great, okay. So just a quick update on community outreach. So we actually started outreach in October of 2020, and everything has to be virtual. And so we developed a couple of tools. And Jen, if you can click on those links, I just wanted to show the commission what some of these look like. So we're relying on all virtual outreach. So we did an online survey. We are working on, and we'll show it to you at the next time we're coming to your May 4th meeting, a values exercise. So trying to figure out what the community values are that will help shape the goals of the plan. And so we have a website, and we also have an online open house. And so I don't know if the link has been shared with this group, but we do have it. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we might not be able to show the link, but I would love to be able to somehow share the link with you all so you can promote it through your networks. It's a pretty interactive, cool website And it asks a number of questions about how you travel through the system by the different types of transportation. Aha, there it is. All right, so this is just the project website. And then that other link would take you to the online open house. And it's on the PDF document. Or wait, you can actually just click it by hitting launch there. So far we've gotten about 350 responses. So, you know, honestly, it's not what I would like to get from a city the size of Vancouver. We recognize that it's been hard to get people's attention, and, you know, there's a lot of other things going on. But yeah, if you hit that launch, the big orange button.
Okay.
Some of the insights we've gotten so far. So there are a lot of people who are equating this project with us being C-Tran. So a lot of comments about better transit frequency. So I think we need to do a better job of explaining to folks, so you can just scroll through it, explaining to folks what this project affects. And so it's city streets. We're not dealing with the interstate bridge. We're not C-Tran. Traffic safety was another theme that came up across the board, and more walking and biking facilities. So I don't know if this link can be shared with the group somehow or put it in the meeting notes, but we would love for you all to promote this. We're keeping this open through the end of March. Would love to get more feedback.
Thank you, Stephanie. Is that the conclusion of your presentation?
That's it.
Awesome. Thank you. And I will recognize Commissioner Ruggles. And then after that, with about 10 minutes left, what I would like to do is just do a quick round, give everyone a minute to talk. You're welcome to pass if you have nothing to say, and then we can kind of move on to the next section, bearing no further discussion. So Commissioner Ruggles, please go ahead.
Thank you. So Stephanie, in terms of outreach, I'm wondering, when we were talking about this, the concept of the equity lens, what other ways are you conducting outreach, especially for, you know, different mobility issues and people that don't have connectivity?
Yeah, we are conducting stakeholder interviews through CBO partners. So the Hispanic Metropolitan Chamber is someone who's agreed to partner with us with compensation to help connect us to people in their community. And so we're hoping to develop those same partnerships with some other folks in like the Russian speaking community and others. And so I think, you know, unfortunately with in-person being so limited, we are going to be relying a lot on people who represent the people who have the needs to help us shape the plan. So I know that a couple of the schools for the visually impaired are on our stakeholder list. It's honestly been hard to engage with people. You know, it's people have got a lot on their minds, a lot going on. We're going to try again in the spring to reach out to some of our stakeholders, but we really only managed to have a couple interviews in the winter.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Williams.
I had a question about functional class. Do those ever get revisited, or once they are established as a, I don't know, collector, arterial, or whatever, is that the way they are? And if so, what is or is this part of the TSP that would potentially reclassify streets? And the second question is there a notion of functional class for alternate modes of transportation other than automobiles?
So functional classification is something we will be looking at in terms of reclassifying some of the streets. So there's different design criteria and design controls associated with the different classifications. And so recognizing, you know, sometimes an arterial goes through a part of the city that's more like a main street, and it has retail and people walking, biking, and so it needs a different sort of treatment. I think the thing that's usually tricky is that the principal arterial classification is tied to federal funding. So you have to be careful about reclassifying in that regard, because you don't want to declass something that removes it from funding. However, there's other things that you can do from, zoning overlays or other things that can still make the land uses and the designs of the street in areas that is a big, wide, fast street, and you don't want it to be, but it's still an arterial, can make it somewhat more pedestrian bike friendly. So yes, we will be looking at street reclassification. The second question about, there's not really I wouldn't say it's a functional classification, but a lot of cities are doing active transportation plans where they're identifying a network of streets that are, here's our basic citywide bike network for what we would call like vehicular cyclists. So people were really confident. And then here's our network of streets that are for more recreational or family style user. And so cities actually will create different maps for different user types. And so in that regard, that's probably the closest thing in terms of like functional classification, because it's defining who would be comfortable using that facility. For bikes in particular, I think less so for the pedestrian side, but we do see some cities, they'll designate slow streets or open streets or things where they're prioritizing walking and biking on them, and they might have temporary street closures or all the time street closures in order to make it more comfortable to walk and bike.
Commissioner Ramos.
Yeah, on the topic of community engagement, I don't know if it's in your plan to seek the help of the Fourth Plane Forward organization that works along the Fourth Plane corridor, and especially given your comment earlier about all of the transportation that the transit that happens in central Vancouver. That's kind of the area that they're focused. That is the area that they're focused on. And then just on that issue of access and equity, I'm clicking through your Be Heard Vancouver page, and I'm wondering if there is any effort to create mirror pages versus just having the feature at the top that does the like Google Translate or whatever service the Bang the Table uses. And then in your open house, it's like, I don't know that there's a feature even to see this information in a different language. So if you could speak more about that.
Sure. So right now, the translate this page is the method we're using to translate this material. And all of the questions that are in the survey are translated in the Be Heard page. So if you click on a different language, then you go to the survey tab. So all of that has been translated. So that's the extent we're doing right now. I mean, I think we're still in a weird place where we're trying to pivot, because we had plans to go out in the community and do pop-ups in places like grocery stores and things, and have materials in Spanish and Russian, like printed materials to hand out. So I don't know, I think maybe later in the spring, I guess it all depends on like vaccination rates and all that stuff. Like we could go back out in the community, because a lot of folks aren't online. And so this probably isn't reaching everyone, and we totally recognize that.
All right, I am going to do a quick round of everyone and just kind of sum up any feedback you have in a few sentences, and I'll call on folks that we haven't heard from as much first, but I'll get through everyone. Commissioner, and you're also welcome to pass, sorry. Commissioner Hardy.
I actually have a few questions. The slide we saw about parking and the increase in parking in the evenings, and then Commissioner Jackson, because she's in the downtown, talked about the lack of office space being utilized, but we have multifamily tax exemptions that are being given actually 100% in the downtown and the waterfront area. To create density. So as we continue to give these multifamily tax exemptions to create density, and then along with that, we have policy and codes that allow these developers to greatly reduce the number of parking. I just see, I know we're transportation, but transportation involves where do you park in the evening? So I just have some concerns and questions.
Commissioner Herman?
I just want to say thank you, Stephanie, for coming back and being patient with us and doing this for a second round. Appreciate work that you're doing. As far as the next steps go, I assume that there'll be recommendations that come out of this plan and go to council. Are those recommendations, they're not going to be formed by this group, they're going to be formed through your work and then sent to us, and then we recommend to the council? Is that how that works?
I'm not sure how the adoption process will work, but yeah, we'll be coming up with recommendations. And this is a policy focused plan, so think policy level. And we have a technical advisory committee. Well, you're on it too. You know what it is. And I think we'll be advising with this group throughout. So I think your input will help us inform the plan, but then I don't think but I'll let Anna speak. I don't think you're the recommending body, but I could be totally wrong.
Thank you. Commissioner Jackson?
Yes, I just have a possible suggestion. Virtually everyone ends up going to the grocery store, so I'm wondering if you could put multiple language flyers in grocery stores that would be, at least let people know that there's more information.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Commissioner Ruggles?
Oh, I'm not muted. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I also thank you, Stephanie, for coming back. And I want to just echo again Commissioner Ramos's point and also Commissioner Jackson. I think that if we're really seeking to ascertain value in the general population, then it really is terribly important that we have a representative sample. And so I really like the idea of the grocery store. And I was just thinking neighborhood newsletters, but that, maybe we have to be creative in procuring these partners, and also wondering about the timeline because of that. And also are schools involved? I mean, the mobility issue includes kids, includes students and so forth. So wondering how wide that net's going to be cast and how we might be procuring some of those partners and the timeline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have both of the school districts are on our technical committee. But yeah, I agree. Grocery stores would probably be a good one to post some flyers.
And the timeline, when you talk about coming back, what's the ultimate timeline that you'll allow?
I think we're looking at plan adoption, probably like first quarter of 2022. So a good solid year from now. So the recommendations would be coming out probably late summer, early fall.
And in that time frame, how long will you be gathering information? That whole time?
Yeah, definitely. I think outreach is an iterative process. So it's like the consultant team is doing some technical work, then you run it past the community, then you refine and back and forth and back and forth. So this isn't the only chance to do existing conditions type of outreach. So the next step is getting some input about values. So community values that are help shape the goals of the whole plan. But I think, we're gonna just be opportunistic and try and engage people as much as we can.
Great. Art, maybe some art.
Thank you. Commissioner Ramos, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you though.
Thank you. Commissioner Rhea?
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps?
So we're wrapping up looking at some of the travel demand data that was coming from the fall of 2020 and thinking through what are some of the key opportunity areas. So this is a policy plan, so it's policy focused. And so, if you think about the end game of where we might end up, it could be anything from, we could find that we want to recommend, a citywide TDM program or a new access to parks emphasis, or we might want to prioritize street crossings near transit stops. And I'm not, there's a huge number of things we can add to that list. I'm not saying that we limit to, but that's just, that's the sort of like policy angle that this plan will be taking. So it's now taking all of this input we have. So we got a lot of comments. There's a map for comment in the online open house. So lots of comments on very specific issues and the bike and walk and drive network, and also some systemic issues. So taking all that and figuring out what are really the needs. So this is a citywide plan. It's a big city. There's a lot you could do, but it's trying to figure out what are really the priorities that would resonate with this city, that we can use to shape the policies in the plan. So of all the things you could do to fix the street network or make it more walkable or bikeable, what are some of the actual policy and programs you could implement to do that? Do you need a safe routes to school program? Do you need on and on, the list goes on. So next steps are.
Who will be making these recommendations? Are we expected to come up with those? Are you going to be? Is someone else? City staff?
Well, that's us, and working in back and forth with our technical advisory committee, which includes the county, RTC, the school districts, the fire department, the police department, all of this long list of stakeholders, with you all, with city staff, with department directors. So it's with a pretty broad group of people, and of course the community. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams?
No other comment.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie, for your time.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
All right. Did anyone have any final comments before we move on to the next action item? Great. So, oh, sorry. We're going to move into the Westside Bike Mobility Project, and I will turn it back over to staff to present on that. And once again, if you want to kind of note down your questions, we will have some time for discussion again at the end.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to share my screen. Ooh, looks like I'm going to be allowed to do that.
Anna, I just made you a host. You want to see if you can share now?
I cannot share yet.
On my screen, it looks like Daria might have become the host.
Uh-oh. We don't want that. Let's try again. Here's Anna. Okay, Anna, your host.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay. So my name's Anna Dearman. I think you all probably know me by now. You received a discussion guide in advance of this presentation, and that was really to help kind of focus the discussion. This presentation is intentionally quite long to try to include as much detail as possible, and I won't be walking through every detail of sort of the history of this project. And I recognize, that makes it somewhat challenging to kind of learn from the details of the history, but it's just to give you an example of the type of information that you will be presented with on similar projects in the future. And so, again, this is an information only item. There is construction anticipated on this project for summer 2021. And so we want to give you an update, but we also want to just go through the project. This was a challenging project, but it's not unlike projects you'll likely see in the future. And we'll go through some of the challenges. And what I'm really hoping you can consider is what will the TMC's sort of interaction with projects like this look like in the future? So thinking back to your training, what type of information do you all need in order to understand a project? How will you kind of explore options? What information will you use to help explore options? And then how will you come to sort of a recommendation? So just be thinking about those steps in the process of the TMC's work. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions and discussion, as Michelle mentioned, and we'll really want to focus that on your work as the TMC and how, again, you might engage with projects like this in the future. You will likely be making recommendations to City Council on projects like this in the future. However, the decisions have already been made by Council for this particular project, and so it's just a case study right now and then an update in case you get questions around the work to occur in 2021. So I kind of went through an overview of this presentation. Again, I'm going to move through some of the more detailed slides quickly, and I hope, if you would like to kind of study those further, then you can do that on your own time. And then we'll really focus the discussion around the TMC's role. And again, this is sort of that framework to keep in mind in asking questions about this project. So the context of this project, the Westside Bike Mobility Project, as we've discussed through our presentations around the Transportation System Plan update, this is a very dynamic time for Vancouver. A lot is changing. There are increased demands on our transportation system. And so there's increased demands to move more people more efficiently and also safely. We'll go into some of the guiding policy for the project, but for a long time, there's been a need for north-south corridors on the west side of Vancouver, so west of Interstate 5, for those to be able to move people regardless of what mode they choose. So driving, biking, walking, rolling, or using a mobility device. And then with this particular project, there were opportunities to implement any improvements in conjunction with other programs at the city, like the pavement management program. So the pavement management program will be presented to the TMC in the future, and it's always an opportunity to look at, okay, we're gonna restripe this street. What are some opportunities to make it better? So this project, when it had been attempted in the past, had been very challenging, and there had been a lot of sort of division in the community around potential options. In looking at the citywide transportation system, we know that there are high risks for people walking and biking in terms of the outcomes, the number of people involved in crashes who are biking and walking. And then we, of course, need to think about, given that these areas of the city are developing, how can the transportation system evolve along with, our land use, our development, other programs. Another challenge within sort of a built-out city like Vancouver, we don't have a blank slate, right? And so a lot of our transportation improvements are redoing existing roads. And so those involve constraints. When we're building a brand new street, we have a lot more flexibility in terms of what we can include. But when you're quote unquote retrofitting existing streets, that provides a lot of creative constraints. So again, sort of the guiding policies relating to the Westside Bike Mobility Project. There were neighborhood action plans that mentioned the need for better biking and walking facilities. The 2004 Transportation System Plan identified certain corridors on the west side. The existing comprehensive plan. There was a project in 2006 that attempted to establish bike lanes on Columbia Street. The Vancouver City Center Vision Plan, which is the downtown plan. And then the City Council's strategic plan called out specific corridors, as well as establishing a complete streets policy, which essentially kind of upped the standard that the city had to meet for serving people of all ages and abilities in transportation improvement projects. And then the Westside Mobility Strategy was essentially a transportation sub-area plan that looked at how people of all modes, how freight was getting around on the west side of the city. And there were several recommendations that came out of that plan. So this was kind of the sequencing of the project. And this will be typical of projects that you'll see in the future. There are all these guiding policies that then eventually evolve into specific projects, and they kind of get more and more and more specific. And then the rubber really meets the road when you get to a project that is attempting to define, a route and then also construct that route. So moving from policy to implementation or construction. So the background of the Westside Bike Mobility Project is really with the Westside Mobility Strategy. So again, that was a multimodal look at projects on the west side of town. So several recommendations came out of, or there were several sort of guiding strategies that came out of that work. One of which was that we need a network of safe and comfortable biking and walking routes. So specifically out of that plan, a few corridors were called out. So Columbia Street, Daniels, Washington, and then Jefferson, Kaufman, Lincoln. And so this, those three sort of corridors kind of helped frame the boundary of the Westside Bike Mobility Project. So the goal was to identify a north-south complete streets bike route, and the project boundaries were the Burnbridge Creek Trail to the north, the waterfront to the south, I-5 to the east, and then Fruit Valley Road to the west. I'm sorry, Main Street to the east. So this was the initial sort of phasing of the project. So the project really began in 2018. We looked at the overall network. Where do people want to go? What would it take to make it feel safe? We looked at various corridors. What would these specific corridors need to look like? What designs would kind of meet those complete streets standards? Phase 3 was really focused on Columbia Street in particular. That emerged from the previous phases as sort of the priority route to implement, but then there was, again, a lot of division around that. And so we convened a community advisory committee to try to look at alternatives and come up with an alternative and a design for Columbia. And then phase 4 is implementation of the selected route, which was Columbia Street, and that was as directed by council in February of 2020. So I'm gonna move pretty quickly through kind of the sequencing, the history of the project. I recognize this is detailed. It's detailed in a similar manner to the McLaughlin project that I presented on before, but there are a lot of slides, and I really want to provide a lot of time for discussion. So again, phase 1, the very beginning of the project, began with this network analysis. So trying to understand existing conditions or what are these streets like today. And so you can see the map of the various streets that were considered. These are north-south streets on the west side of town that provide connectivity. They're not broken up by, they don't go through all the way or something like that, like a lot of the streets, even though we do have somewhat of a grid on the west side. And so some of the data that we collected, and this is where you can be thinking about what information do you need to understand the situation to help explore options and then make a recommendation on the project. So we looked at traffic speed and volume counts. So how fast is traffic moving? How much traffic is there? It's drivers. Parking utilization. So what does the rate of parking use look like on these corridors? How many people are biking and walking on these corridors? A level of traffic stress analysis. This is something that we are doing for the transportation system plan update as well. And there are ways that you can look at, given the context, the nature of the street, how stressful does it feel to bike on that street? And so this map actually shows the level of traffic stress, with the dark green being least stressful, and then the orange and the red were the most stressful areas. We collected drone footage of the corridors and counted intersections and also driveways and estimated driveway capacity. So these are similar to other projects in terms of data collection. And then of course, the other element of data collection is community outreach. And so we did various activities, and a lot of these listed activities are going to be pretty similar from phase to phase. So at the time, in-person activities were an option. And so we presented to neighborhood associations, other associations and community-based organizations. We had various events, and then an online open house and survey, communications materials, earned media, that type of thing. This is what some of the materials looked like. You might remember some of them. And then distilling down, what we gleaned from the data collection and then what we heard from the community, we needed to develop a network of safe and connected routes, so that connectivity was key. And then in some cases, it would take, those facilities would need to be separated or protected in some cases, so that people actually felt comfortable riding on certain streets, and that kind of correlated with the speeds and the volumes that you would see on particular streets. We asked people, again, where they want to go, where they see issues in the current network. And so in terms of destinations and preferred routes, Columbia Street, Daniels and Franklin, and the Lincoln and Kaufman really stood out. And then again, in terms of clustering those destinations that people are trying to access, Columbia Street really stood out. So the next phase, and this is part of sort of the explore sort of phase, is what we call an alternatives analysis. In this phase, we examined the various corridors and then used a rubric to evaluate how they ranked in comparison to each other in terms of access and connectivity. So how connected is this route in comparison to this route? How safe is this route? What other multimodal improvements could we implement as a part of this route? And the community context and the impact of potential improvements. So through this alternatives analysis that was conducted by our consultant, Columbia Street scored the highest in terms of this kind of quantitative, qualitative analysis. Moving into that phase, we were developing design concepts for what it would take to make these routes feel safe and comfortable. And so this was a preliminary design concept for Columbia, in which we would have protected bike lanes between Mill Plain Boulevard and 45th Street, and then a parking protected bike lane on one side between 6th Street and Mill Plain. And then this would involve significant on-street parking removal, especially in the segment between Mill Plain and 45th. So again, as always, part of the sort of routine coordination that we do as part of these projects, we worked with CTRAN, our transit agency, the post office, solid waste, the Veterans Assistance Center, which is a service provider located along Columbia Street, the Vancouver Housing Authority, which has property along Columbia Street, and other areas on the west side, as well as citywide, to understand how this project or these options would impact these service providers. So the next stage of public outreach was to go out to the community with, we heard that these were the streets that you all were interested in. This is what it would take to make these streets feel safe and comfortable. Here are the design concepts. What are your responses to these design concepts? And so we did a lot of similar activities, sort of smaller engagement events, larger engagement events, pop-up engagement events, and we also, during this phase, collected more data. And so as Stephanie mentioned with regard to the TSP update, data collection, public outreach is iterative. And so again, thinking back to that understand, explore, decide, we seek to understand in the initial phase of these projects and to collect data and to collect feedback. We seek to, reference previous policy, which also reflects feedback. And so we're building off of all of this information, but then sometimes we realize, you know, we don't have enough information on this or that in order to understand these alternatives. And so this happened several times in the course of this project, and that's normal. We often have to iterate and collect more data and collect more feedback in order to help us analyze alternatives and then make recommendations. So that's just something for you all to think about in how you might engage with projects like this in the future. So again, outreach to the community, lots of different communications materials and communications channels were used, as well as, you know, so ranging from the more sort of sophisticated or sort of leading edge, like social media or using electronic materials, to just in-person visits. Obviously that in particular is not possible right now, but maybe and hopefully will be again in the future. So this is where really the divisions around the project really came out. So there was a lot of support for a complete streets facility, as well as preserving parking, on-street parking, and then just maintaining the existing look and feel and historic nature of the neighborhoods. The design concepts that were presented were pretty polarizing. So a lot of people really liked them. A lot of people really did not like them. Again, on-street parking was the greatest concern, and that's no surprise. And then there was also a concern around the need for continued public outreach on the project. So given that feedback, you know, Columbia Street was initially scheduled to be repaved in 2020. And so that was, I'm sorry, it was initially scheduled to be repaved in 2019. So this project has iterated quite a bit. And so that was postponed to 2020. You'll see that it was later postponed again. But basically, you know, what we heard was we need more engagement. And so we did more engagement. We, again, convened a community advisory committee. There was an application process. It was somewhat similar to putting together this Transportation and Mobility Commission, except it was project specific. And so that's something that we do. That is an option with projects as a way of sort of deepening public engagement, as well as doing broader engagement in conjunction with this very specific committee that will kind of more intensively review the project. So again, this just kind of describes the steps involved in what is now phase 3 of the project. We convened the CAC, we worked with them over several months. We still had outreach activities like we had in the previous phases, communications channels, communications materials, and then we still engaged with other existing committees. The TMC was not around at the time, but the Parking Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission, we coordinated with them just as we would with other projects. And you'll see that too in future projects. So I think the question came up around the TSP. You know, what is the TMC's role regarding the TSP? And you all will be making a recommendation on the TSP as well as the Planning Commission, because the TSP is an element of the comprehensive plan, and then City Council will be making the ultimate decision. So there are various sort of workflows that are used with our various committees and commissions for different projects, and it kind of depends on the project. So the charge of the Community Advisory Committee was to focus on Columbia Street and alternative corridors. So the charge of the Community Advisory Committee was to solve the problem of Columbia Street. Can we change the design? Can we change the corridor to meet this goal of a north-south bike facility, but to also, you know, come to consensus around these various challenges and trade-offs involving Columbia Street specifically. So the CAC looked at things like safety, mobility, accessibility, connectivity, parking, among the various options. So the CAC actually worked in sort of a lot of workshop formats to develop route options and then to evaluate those route options, and to provide input to staff's final recommendation to City Council. And then this last bullet just kind of describes the makeup of the committee. They were residents, business owners, service providers, community organizations, transit riders, members of other committees, and then just sort of users of the transportation network. Again, a lot of the same public outreach activities and communications channels we used even as part of the CAC process. So the CAC was a smaller group that was working more intensively on the project, but then their work was still brought out to the larger community. So again, sort of the outcomes of this process, the CAC identified sort of alternative routes, and for the most part, that was to provide an alternative to the large amount of on-street parking lost with the original proposal for Columbia. The route options included all kinds of things. Can we have, a bike facility that's one way in this direction and then another way in another direction and uses a different street? What about a neighborhood greenway, which is a type of bike facility that doesn't require very many changes to the existing design of the street? What is our tolerance for having people zig and zag and jog, and I forget all the language that was used, but can we simply route people around all of the obstacles that are these trade-offs involved in the transportation system? And then again, the intent was to come to a consensus around a particular route, and as you'll see, we did not come to a consensus, or the Community Advisory Committee did not come to a consensus that we could then present to City Council. So specifically, these were the route options that were developed. And so again, thinking about, as a Transportation Mobility Commissioner, you're being presented with all of these iterations of information, data collection, options for understanding a project, and then there are these various stages in the project in which you are evaluating different alternatives, and it's iterative. And so the CAC process involved even more data collection, alternatives, sort of ideation in order to explore these options. And so it's a similar kind of project development and consideration process that we discussed in your training. So at this stage of alternatives analysis, the options were on Columbia Street, protected bike lanes in each direction. That was the original proposal for Columbia Street. We also looked at a Columbia Washington couplet, which would have one-way protected bike lanes in one direction on Columbia, and then the other direction would come back on Washington. We looked at sort of a hybrid with a neighborhood greenway on Daniel Street and then a bike lane on Columbia Street. We looked at the recommendation from the Westside Mobility Strategy for a neighborhood greenway and then a two-way protected bike facility on Washington, which is a one-way street for driving. And then we looked at a Daniels Franklin option, which was a neighborhood greenway, and then involved an amount of protected bike lanes in both directions on Franklin Street. And then we also looked at just Franklin Street itself as an option. And so this was, again, kind of considering those alternative corridors in the vicinity of Columbia. So to try to summarize the outcome of the CAC process, the conflicts and the division sort of remained. There was a conflict between providing a direct and safe route versus maintaining on-street parking and really not making any changes to the neighborhood. There are pros and cons to each route option, and they impact different users differently. For example, there was a lot of division in those who supported Columbia for various reasons and who supported Daniels and Washington or Daniels and Franklin for various reasons. There was definitely a lot of desire for a design compromise between providing a bike route and then maintaining on-street parking. There is consensus around providing multimodal improvements in addition to a bike facility. So how can we improve sidewalks? How can we calm traffic? Can we provide street trees? What are other options or opportunities for improving the streetscape? And then again, there is an expressed need to that infrastructure is one solution to improving the transportation network, but we also need to educate users, and we need more outreach to users and people recommended enforcement as well. So the options, the alternatives that we presented to City Council as an outcome of trying to distill this work of the CAC down was the original alternative of Columbia protected bike lanes, which, again, sort of rose to the top in the evaluation, but also has some of the greatest impacts in loss of almost 400 parking spaces, on-street parking spaces. And then we also presented a hybrid option in which we would have protected bike facilities for a portion of Columbia, and then it would essentially kind of compromise the bike facility in an effort to preserve parking. And so this is what was presented to City Council. In addition to that, we presented several other kind of multimodal options, reducing the speed limit, additional traffic calming such as speed bumps, speed cushions, removing the traffic circle. You can read all of these things, but various sort of enhancements looking at this package of improvements more holistically. And so again, this is what was presented to City Council as an outcome of the Community Advisory Committee process in February 2020. So after that council presentation, City Council directed us to implement the Columbia Street protected bike lanes option. So alternative 1 was the outcome of the City Council meeting. Then in March of last year, almost exactly a year ago to the day, was the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, and City sort of pivoted to focusing on emergency response due to COVID-19, and we were anticipating a lot of budget impacts. We had already sort of encountered a lot of budget impacts due to the passage of Initiative 976 in November of 2019. And so all of the pavement management program was scaled back. And so Columbia was again postponed to 2021. Just based on financial impacts, and council elected to kind of redistribute the available sort of remaining funding to other pavement management work. We applied for a grant to fund the multimodal components, so the bicycle and pedestrian components of the project that aren't covered just through the pavement management work. We should know the results of that grant application in mid-2021. And then council also approved funding for the project as a backup. Then Initiative 976 was deemed unconstitutional by the Washington State Supreme Court. And so funding for the pavement management program and other transportation programs was restored. And then we decided to implement Columbia, the full extent of Columbia between Columbia Way and 45th Street in 2021, just to sort of save on costs by having all of that work done at once, all the construction materials purchased at once. So now we're kind of up to speed on the project. What's going on right now is we're finalizing the design for the project. We're doing outreach with the neighborhoods, and we're doing general outreach with the public around the design and then the construction to be done this year. Just so you all are aware, if it comes up in the community, this is what you can anticipate this year. So there are multiple sort of steps involved in the pavement management process. They do some prep work, trim trees, that kind of thing. They actually install curb ramp improvements prior to the pavement work, and that's required because the pavement work is federally funded. And then they will do one type of pavement treatment on Columbia between Columbia Way and Mill Plain, and that's a preservation treatment. So it doesn't involve kind of completely reconstructing the street. And then the second part of Columbia will be between Mill Plain and 45th Street. And that segment of the street is in pretty bad shape if you're familiar with it. And so essentially the street has to be ground out and then replaced. And so the striping that goes down will reflect the new bicycle facility. And then as soon as that striping is ready, then the sort of the three-dimensional elements will go in. So the vertical protection between the bike lanes, and then of course there will be a lot of communications involved. I kind of already went through the pavement management work. So just to run quickly through sort of the final design for Columbia, I'll go segment by segment pretty quickly. Columbia Way to 8th Street, there's an existing shared use path on the west side of the street. And so we'll be kind of increasing the visibility of that path through some markings for the pavement, and we'll be replacing the existing on-street bike lanes and on-street parking. We will have some intersection improvements for people biking at Columbia and 8th, and I'll show those a bit later. Between 8th Street and 12th Street will be parking protected bike lanes. So parking will be preserved on the east side, and that will actually help protect the bike lane. Between 12th and 13th, there's no parking, and so just protected bike lanes in both directions. We'll replace the existing on-street bike lanes. Between 13th Street and Mill Plain, we will be preserving the parking on the east side of the street. And originally we had a buffered, unprotected bike lane in one direction and then a shared lane in the other direction. And this kind of created a skew at the intersection. So people driving were having to kind of weave to continue through this block. And so we basically just kind of flipped the cross section so that bike lane is actually on the west side of the street in the southbound direction now, and it'll be protected. And then the shared street will be, or the shared lane will be in the northbound direction on the east side of this street, and then the parking will be adjacent to the curb on the east side. We'll also be providing a drop-off zone for the Veterans Assistance Center in this block, and then changing the parking on Mill Plain and 15th near this block to add longer term options for people visiting the VAC. Mill Plain to 45th will be protected bike lanes in both directions and then removal of on-street parking. This is just a rendering of what the improvements will look like at Columbia and McLaughlin. And then Columbia and 24th, you'll see the traffic circle there is being removed, speed tables being preserved. It's actually a speed hump being upgraded to a speed table. So other things that are going in, there will be green bike boxes, cross bikes or bike lane extensions, more speed tables, leading pedestrian intervals for people walking across the street, improved bike detection, bicycle pedestrian counters, crosswalk improvements, so converting less visible, just parallel stripe crosswalks to ladder style, which are more visible, and then improved lighting for those crosswalks. These are just some images of some of those improvements if you're not familiar with them. That's a bike box in the upper left, two-stage left turn box in the upper right that just helps people cross an intersection more safely. They just have to do it in 2 different turns. And so that will be at Columbia and 8th Street. You can see the bike lane extension bottom left and then the speed table rendering bottom right. The top left is an image of the product that we're considering for the bike lane protection. And then top right is that leading pedestrian interval where the people can actually cross the street before it turns green. That just kind of gives them more time. There's an example of an existing ladder style crosswalk just off Columbia there at the bottom left, and then bottom right is a bike lane detection camera. And that actually works better than sort of the loops that are included in the pavement. So I mentioned some of the parking mitigations around the Veterans Assistance Center. We're also developing a residential parking program so that'll be available to people with ADA placards or disabled parking placards. And they would be able to request a parking space on a side street near their home if they're impacted by on-street parking removal. And then we can also provide one-on-one technical assistance to folks who want to create off-street parking opportunities on their property. So again, you can think of mitigation too as part of the explore kind of phase of the project, or maybe you're moving toward making a recommendation and you know that this recommendation is going to have adverse impacts. And so what are some mitigations that you can explore or recommend as part of that recommendation? It is our sort of established practice to evaluate our Complete Streets project. I mentioned to you all, we're in the process of evaluating the McLaughlin project. And so we will be evaluating the Columbia Street project as well. And so that is something that you will likely see in the future as far as, additional information on the Westside Bike Mobility Project specific to the Columbia Street route implementation. So the evaluation will include community member feedback, more qualitative analysis of how the project is working for folks. And that will be through, various engagement activities, various means of submitting, comment and feedback. There will be more technical analysis, traffic speeds and volumes, parking utilization studies, bicycle and pedestrian use. And then the outcome of the evaluation will be any recommendations on how to modify the project if needed, and then key takeaways to be applied to future projects. Okay, so I believe we have at least 10 minutes here. This slide just kind of frames some of the key considerations and sort of questions that we're hoping you all will weigh in kind of taking in this information around the Westside Bike Mobility Project. But I can open it up to questions at this time. And again, where the points, the purpose in presenting this information to you is not necessarily to kind of excavate details of this project. We'll get into those details with future projects, and there's certainly lessons to be learned. But as you imagine working on similar projects in the future, what are your considerations? What are your questions as a TMC member? What do you need to know? So it looks like we've got some hands raised, and I can hand it over to Michelle to facilitate questions, and I can respond.
Thank you. Let's start with Commissioner Jackson, and then Ruggles, and then Herman, please.
Thanks, Anna. What I'm wondering is, if you looked at this project, if you could go back in time and put us in the process, at what different points would you have had the Transportation Mobility Commission working on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I really can't speak to this as well as probably Jennifer Campos can, and Jennifer will be back in terms of kind of laying out the work of the TMC, but I can see you all being involved in all of those stages that we described. So obviously you'll be involved in the development of the guiding policy for these kinds of projects. So the TSP, there's a prioritization process that will come out of the TSP in which, the input from community members, input from technical stakeholders and service providers, the schools, the other stakeholders that we mentioned, input from the TMC is going to craft the guiding policy that will then lead to projects in the future. And so you'll be involved in projects like this at the guiding policy stage, so sort of outside of the project, actually. You'll be helping craft the policy that will lead to projects. And so then when we get to the project, it won't be sort of a surprise. It'll be something that the community has prioritized. And so I can see us presenting, okay, here is what data we've collected. What more do we need? Here are sort of the understand phase of the project. Here are, the options, the alternatives in front of us. help us explore these options and these alternatives. What more information do we need? How do we need to go back to understand and iterate on understand in order to explore? And then you all will be making recommendations on projects like this in the future. So you all will be making recommendations on projects like this that would then get presented to Planning Commission or City Council as appropriate.
Okay, so there could still be a community committee, or would this be, okay.
I think potentially there could be,
Okay.
you know, a lot of times it makes sense if it's like geographically specific.
Yeah.
You know, it makes sense if it has other elements like a land use element kind of thing. If that depth of engagement is needed, you know, it could also be that you all designate a subcommittee of the TMC to dig a bit deeper on a project like this. I would leave it open to any of those outcomes. They're really good questions, and I'm sorry I can't answer them with more.
That's okay. That helped considerably.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Ruggles.
Thank you, Anna. That's a lot of information, and it looks like you've all been very thorough. So in terms of the type of information needed and sort of understanding the process, you know, you talked about a couple of things. So do you, in this process, are the statements like pro or con, are they documented and summarized and made available? That's one, and then I could just have a couple more thoughts. You talked about ideation and the iterative process, and that made me think of design thinking. And so in the actual process, are you allowing people to do that literally with, you know, when you looked at you said there wasn't a consensus and you ended up having sort of this hybrid, and then there was a recommendation made, but within the process were people given like sticky notes and worked, you know, with this idea, design thinking. Like one thing I noticed in there, I don't know if this ever came up, but certain cities have X's in their crosswalks, and it supposedly creates a lot more flexibility and safety for pedestrians. So, you know, just in the sense of a really good cross fertilization, do you feel like that process includes that, or is that something that going in the future that we might be considering a little bit more deeply and broadly?
Yeah, those are great questions. Thank you. So in terms of the feedback, was it recorded and was it summarized? Yes to both. So all of the comments, which were received in various formats, were grouped by theme, and so it was summarized in the sense of, okay, this is a theme that's emerging. We've heard this particular kind of comment several times, and so those various themes were presented in summary. But then, and this, I should say, this is our sort of standard practice, is to provide both, you know, here's what we're hearing from the community over and over again, and then also provide, you know, these are the verbatim comments received kind of as an appendix. So for this project in particular, and I can put the link in the chat, all of those public outreach summaries and then the comments, the actual input received, those are available in like PDF documents on the web page. And so I'll send you the link to that web page where you can find all of that material for this particular project. And then to your question about design thinking, I think you know, that's a great question, and we do. I always say we implement some design thinking practices. So definitely stickies, colored dots. Planners love our colored dots, both in terms of kind of identifying, you know, more like values, more sort of text kind of ideas or sort of approaches that people align with, as well as actual sort of design elements. And so both through the broader public outreach process, as well as the more intensive CAC kind of workshop process, we did use some elements of design thinking. I would say that there are limitations to the amount of kind of design thinking that we can incorporate. And that may just be based on you know, the specific technical nature of the material. It may be based on the wide geographic scope. But I would say we do try to incorporate those processes, those methods as possible. We can certainly, you know, we're open to that input, and we can certainly strive to think outside the box as far as that goes in the future.
And looking beyond to see other ideas like the X crosswalk or things that work in cities that are comparable, you know, things like that. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, yeah, so definitely, you know, reviewing case studies and things like that from other cities. I mean, I would say, to answer your question, like, yes, we do these things. Sometimes we get told no, that we can't do these things, you know? So, you know, the X crosswalk that you mentioned, for example, or something like a pedestrian scramble, where basically I think this is what you're talking about, but the traffic is at a signalized intersection, the traffic lights all go red, and then people biking and walking can just like cross the street in any direction. There are some examples in Portland. It's actually something we looked at for Columbia Street, at Columbia and 8th Street, actually. And then for various reasons, you know, our city engineers are not comfortable with it. Washington State guidance and adoption of federal standards around these designs may not be in place. So for a variety of reasons, sometimes we're not able to implement creative approaches that other cities have attempted.
All right.
So it's very helpful to hear these ideas.
Thank you. Commissioner Herman, and then I do want to do a time check. I want to make sure that we move into the citizen communication on time, but we do have some additional time for discussion at the end of our meeting with our commission.
Thank you, Chair McKenzie. So regarding, I'm first off glad that this commission was formed after this project for selfish purposes. But the other perspective is the information. I think that's important when we look at these projects. When we get into the weeds, we start thinking, why are we doing this project? And I think that purpose of why this project is necessary and what problem we're trying to solve needs to be reiterated throughout the process, so it can remind us of what the goal is and what the mission is to promote the city's transportation. And then the second thing, and I think Commissioner Ruggles pointed this out, is what can be solved and what is an engineering judgment that it needs to be stamped by an engineer and is not as flexible as we think. I think that's important to know.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. I am going to pause us for a moment here so we can go into the citizen communication, but we will have some time to pick this back up after that portion of the meeting.
Okay, Chair McKenzie, did you want me to start the citizen communication now?
Yeah, if you will start recognizing the citizens that we have lined up to
Okay.
speak.
Okay, that I will do that. Okay, so I have 2 people that have registered for testimony tonight. And so, I'm sorry, I'm fidgeting around here with my screen. There we go. So the first one I'll be calling is Glenn Young. And Mr. Young, I'll be promoting you to a panelist. And at that time, I would like you to make sure your video is on so that we can see you and that you're unmuted. And you'll state your name. And then at that point, and your address. And at that point, we'll start. You have a 3-minute time that you can share. All right. So Mr. Young, I promoted you to panelist. Asked you to unmute. Start your video. Mr. Young, can you unmute and start your video?
Can we move on and come back to him?
Yeah, I was just going to give him a couple minutes to do that, or a little bit, but we will do that. Mr. Young, I'm going to leave you on as a panelist. If you can work on that, that would be great. The next person I have is Peter Fells. So Mr. Fells, I'm going to promote you to a panelist now. And yes, we see you. Thank you. Just need to unmute yourself. There we go.
Are we done?
All right. We see you. We can hear you, I think. Go ahead and state your name and your address for us.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Peter Fells. I live on Franklin Street in Northwest Vancouver. And I first want to start by thanking the commissioners, because I know a lot of you are volunteers, so I want to thank you for your time. So I wanted to talk about both the transit plan and briefly about Westside mobility, mostly about the transit planning. I want to start by saying I was disturbed that Ms. Wright commented that city streets did not involve C-Tran, because it seems to me that when we're talking about transit in transportation in Vancouver, public transit is extremely important. I think that a priority for our transportation plan should be to increase transit ridership. And so what I want to talk about is asking you to think of the policy that transit should be free. We want to encourage more ridership, and one of the best ways to do that is to remove the fares, or at the very least, remove the fares for all but the more wealthy individuals who can afford it. I noted in a recent presentation, I think it's to the City Council, that fares only represent 14% of C-Tran's revenue. And we can offset that by thinking about how much expense for city streets would be saved if people were riding on buses or other forms of transit instead of driving in their personal cars. We would save money on costs of roads, would save environmental costs such as pollution in the waterways, and we'd even save money on fare enforcement if we made there not have to be a fare. She mentioned in her presentation that large employers are encouraged to help with other means of transit, and we could certainly continue to have large employers contribute to C-Tran or whatever transit system we have. So basically my point is, when you're talking policy, I think we really ought to be looking at making public transit free. With regard to Westside mobility, just very briefly, I want to point out that it stops at 45th Street. And we've got a real problem. There's no connection across the Burnt Bridge Creek area. 45th Street itself between Columbia and Main Street is impossible to ride a bike. Well, it's not impossible. I did it this morning or yesterday, but it's very, very difficult. And so the next phase, we need to be looking at improving 45th Street for bicyclists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll unmute myself.
Thank you. And I will be moving you back to that as an attendee. It looks like, as far as I can tell, let's see.
Mr. Young put in the chat box that he's having technical problems.
Yes, and I did respond to him, and I got a pop-up message that said he wasn't a part of the meeting, and yet I see him. So I'm going to try again just in case. Mr. Young, are you there? And can you unmute yourself? Okay, he's not. Okay. All right, so that is all that I had in terms of public comment. And Chair McKenzie, I believe I'll turn it back to you because we had a written testimony that I think we were going to read. We had agreed to read out loud.
Yeah, thank you. And should we invite Mr. Young to submit his testimony as written comment or to return to a future meeting?
Yeah, I'll follow up with him with an email and invite him to share with us what he wanted to do. And so
Okay.
if that's okay, David, would that be okay?
Yes, absolutely. That would be fine. It's, you know, we we do the best we can given our limitations. So I think that'd be the best choice to follow.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Chair McKenzie, this is Ryan Laposa.
Yes, Ryan Laposa.
Streets and Transportation Manager with the city. If at some point I could offer up a response to the gentleman who did speak regarding CTRAN and the Transportation Systems Plan at your pleasure.
Yeah. Yes, please do offer your response.
Okay. I think what our consultant was trying to convey when she was talking about CTRAN is the city of Vancouver is often confused as being the one that operates the transit system. And so we've once again encountered that confusion as we've been doing our outreach. Transit is a key component to the Transportation Systems Plan. And so we're working very closely with CTRAN to better highlight the transit options and how the overall transportation system plan and the transit system plan can work together. Now, I don't know if that would ever result in a no fare option. That is obviously something that CTRAN would have to consider. But we are working very closely with them as we develop this transportation systems plan to address the transit portion of our community.
Thank you, Brian Laposa. Jan, we do have someone in the chat, and can you advise on the process for, it looks like we have someone who would like to provide testimony in real time. Jan, you're on mute, sorry.
Yes, Susan Bladholm, she and I had corresponded earlier today. She was supposed to be able to provide comment at our last meeting, and mistake on my part, I didn't invite her up to panelist. So I told her that we could do so today, and I see she's been able to join us. So if that's okay, Chair, I'm going to go ahead and move her over to panelist so she can share her comment.
Yes, please do.
Okay. So Susan, getting ready to promote you to panelist, and if you'll unmute yourself and turn your video on, we'll be able to hear you and see you. There we go.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank
Great,
you. And I don't know if you heard my instruction to the last person, but you have 3 minutes, and at 30 seconds, I'll give you a reminder after you share your name and address at at 30 seconds, I'll let you know you have 30 seconds left, so you know where you're at in time.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Jan, for that. My name is Susan Bladholm, and I'm the founder of Friends of Frog Ferry, and I live at 902 Southwest Shaker Place in Portland, Oregon. And I'm here with you today just to say hello and kind of put a face with the name. 4 years ago, I embarked on this journey to look into just best practices of river cities. And here we are 4 years later, and I wanted to let you know that we have conducted, raised the funds for, and delivered the 3 key feasibility studies that the public agencies told us we needed to do. And everything shows that this is absolutely feasible. And candidly, it's pretty darn cost effective. We plan to put a first vessel, a pilot project on the water in summer of 2022. And that will be between Cathedral Park and the South Waterfront in Portland. And then we would like to extend that to Vancouver, beginning with the public ferry service in 2024. So I welcome the opportunity. If any of you are curious to reach out to me, please check out our website at frogferry.com. And we have lots of one-pagers and all on this. I am working with the Port of Vancouver and actually just had a meeting with their staff yesterday. This is very much a grassroots effort. We're a nonprofit, but we have a vessel specified and ready to put on order. And then I'm really happy to announce that the City of Portland, under the leadership of Commissioner Hardesty, agreed last month to be our local sponsor for our federal funding request. The Federal Transportation Administration and the Passenger Ferry Fund. So we will be putting forth a grant application next month to go ahead and start that first ferry service in about 16 months from now. So thank you so much for your consideration. I very much appreciate the spirit of volunteerism that you're all giving and investing in our community, and I appreciate the opportunity. Can hear you, Jan.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your comment.
Thank you. And do we have, rather than having me read, it looks like our submitter of written testimony is present and ready to read that if we want to recognize him.
Yes, I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so Terry, I will promote you to panelist. You've heard the spiel, introduce yourself, and once you do that, I'll give you 3 minutes and remind you at the 30-minute mark or 30-second mark that you have 30 seconds. You need to unmute yourself and
yep.
There we
It's
go.
working on it. Can you guys see
There
me
you
now?
are. Okay, we can see you and hear you. Thank
Perfect.
you.
I was for a second there. I was getting excited. 30 minutes. Wow. Hello, everyone.
I know.
My name is Terrence Seibert. I'm a resident up on 28th Street in Vancouver in the Carter Park neighborhood. My testimony tonight pertains to the Westside Bike Mobility Project used as a case study today. I was a member of the public who attended all the CSE sessions, as well as some of the public outreach in 2019 and 2020, and here to kind of provide a perspective if we're using this project as lessons learned. The material that's presented today as a case study the project itself is valuable as input of what not to do. Unfortunately, you won't learn from the material that's being shared, so I just want to highlight a couple things for your consideration. One, the project struggled to define a clear definition and scope of the problem to be addressed. It's mentioned earlier tonight about as an example, the project was supposed to connect up to Burnt Creek Road or the Burnt Creek Trail. It did not do so. And so how it's being evaluated and a coherent process up front of how recommendations were made the project struggled with. The net result is members becoming entrenched in subjective positions and staff abandoning the effort before the members of the CAC could achieve meaningful consensus. Second, the lack of baseline data for measuring improvements is missing, even to this day, more than a year later. Instead, generalizations on safety statistics were made to justify the safety mitigation needed on Columbia Street, and that street was the most appropriate route. The facts on the ground for the actual incidences the project team had do not justify the decision. Instead, these statistics were lumping in pedestrians and more citywide numbers, making it very hard to kind of get to something meaningful to use as fact-based decisions. Third, there was no established practice used to decide on how the project team, how decisions were being made, and the project team resisted meaningful input, I felt, both from the public as well as members from the CAC themselves. Instead of using a framework like choosing by advantages offered by one of the CAC members, it was used successfully in the Federal Forest Service. The team intended to then go homegrown, doing a build understanding, explore evaluation criteria, group these ideas coming from the members into groups, unweighted, and then ask the members to provide a subjective scoring. There was no attempt further to approve the analysis and the discourse after that. And frustrated members were allowed to walk out of these meetings, and staff were allowed for perfect scores from some of these members that skewed the results while, and I'm happy to elaborate further in the future. The idea here is, if we're going to learn from the mistakes from the past and don't repeat them here, I encourage you to demand more from the city staff and more than what's being offered now. Before understand, explore, and decide, you need to get to a clear problem definition of the scope in practical terms before you make decisions. Be critical of the information presented to you, that relevant information meets your needs and clearly cites sources and has keys and is very clear. For example, on slide 28 of the update you got today, bike facility section is really dumbed down and lacks the sources and inaccurate on LTS scoring. And lastly, agree on a process and decision framework in advance of your journey. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fels.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ibert. We appreciate your testimony.
Oh, I'm sorry, not Mr. Fels. I apologize.
And we appreciate all of our citizens who came and testified for this committee today. It's really valuable to this process. Before we move back into our commission communication, Loretta Callahan with the City of Vancouver, did you have something to contribute?
Right, I was just going to, if I could, Chair, let the commission know that some of the suggestions that were discussed during the transportation system plan, we actually already have those underway. We have an internal communications group that is meeting with consultant communications and have developed a half-sheet handout in both Spanish and English that we're distributing on the Fourth Plane Forward and in the corridor, teaming up with our Street Eats program so we can talk to the businesses at the same time that we provide the half-sheet handout. That's just beginning, so I wanted to let you know that was happening, as well as arranging some sessions with our some of our accessibility communities and getting some of their input and involvement as well. So those things are underway, and I appreciate those suggestions that came. It sounds like everybody's working towards the same goal of getting more input. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're now moving back into commission communication, and I know Commissioner Williams and I believe Commissioner Raya had some additional comments on the Westside Mobility Project. So Commissioner Williams, I did want to recognize you first. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks. I probably don't need to pull up the slides, but one of the questions is like, how would you go about evaluating a future program of this sort? When I remember, gosh, this has been a year ago. It's been a rough year, hasn't it? I took all of the different proposals that are out there, and I used a modified Kepner-Trago analysis that I've used in my professional life for a gajillion years. And almost immediately it came out to safety versus parking. That was it. So there was that analysis was clear and rapid. The question I have for, I think, Ms. Dearman, where in policy, in strategic intent, or I don't know what, is an advocacy for on-street parking discussed, valued? There's plenty of materials out there valuing, through safety and enhanced mobility for, other systems, whether it's the strategic plan or the complete streets. But I've not seen, and from my ignorance, I'm sure, what the advocacy is for on-street parking.
So thank you for your question. I can respond to that. I mean, you can find sort of policy around parking in various locations in our policy documents. So the Vancouver Municipal Code governs parking. The Parking Advisory Committee is charged with sort of oversight over those areas of the city that have managed parking, and downtown. A lot of the city does not have managed parking. There are standards for the provision of on-site parking in our development code, and then our street standard details. So basically, when you have a street functional classification, like we talked about earlier, there are various designs that can be applied to that functional classification. Say someone wants to develop a site adjacent to an arterial street. Well, they're required to improve their frontage along that street to standard. And so some of those street standards include options for on-street parking or bike lanes. I'm not sure if you're asking about, a citywide value around on-street parking that is codified in any type of planning document. I mean, I would say it's, it's represented maybe more in the abstract. There is definitely a recognition in multiple policy documents that, there is need for on-street parking and that it should be balanced with other needs, that would be assumed even with the complete streets policy that, there are areas where it makes sense to have on-street parking, and there are areas where it makes sense for the street to serve other purposes. And so I don't know that, it's as clear as some other values and sort of directives related to safety and other things.
Thank you. Commissioner Rea, did you still have some commentary around the Westside Mobility Project?
Yes, I'll keep it as brief as possible. Thank you. I guess my first comment is Mr. Ibert. I read his letter and I was listening to his comments. I wasn't sure how he formed the basis for the comments that he made, and it appears that Anna and her group have done yeoman's effort in terms of reaching out to try to get input on this. And I hope that we have a balanced perspective on that, although I appreciate dissenting opinions. They're always interesting to have. My question is, Anna, how did you choose the Westside mobility as a starting point for this? Because I didn't see anything in the materials indicating why this particular area.
Yeah, so it does kind of flow out of that guiding policy. So I would say the most immediate kind of impetus for the project actually predates my time at the city, but it came out of the City Council's strategic plan, the 2016-2021 strategic plan. So the Westside Mobility Strategy was adopted in 2016. The Complete Streets Policy was adopted in 2017. That strategic plan was also adopted in 2016, and it actually required it directed staff to develop a complete streets policy, and so it was essentially implementing these directives from the strategic plan, which reflected other policy guidance. So some of the things recommended in the strategic plan were also included in the 2004 Transportation System Plan. Were also included in the 2007 Downtown Plan, and then were sort of summarized in this 2016 strategic plan. And so we just basically started kind of going down the list of things that council asked us to do per the strategic plan. We developed the complete streets policy. We looked at we looked at a bike. So, they directed us to look at a few corridors. McLaughlin was one of them. So we initiated the McLaughlin project. They asked us to look at Columbia Street specifically, and so we did that within the context of the Westside Mobility Strategy, which was somewhat broader than Columbia Street in specific. So basically, they gave us all these directives in the strategic plan, and then we pursued those projects within the larger body of policy, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. It seems to me like in a field of dreams sort of way, if we build these things, hopefully the bikers will employ them. One of the biggest uses of biking would be east-west movement, which of course the McLaughlin project does a great job managing. It would seem to me if we can focus our next iteration of this on east-west transportation, that might be a great way to promote the use of bikes in the city.
Yeah, thank you. And if I could just respond to that really quickly, I should say, we're basically working with, prioritized projects from previous planning processes. And then I completely agree, and you're right. The next phase likely, sorry, I probably should have reordered this comment, but the next phase likely would do something like focus on east-west instead of north-south, or maybe go back and implement those other north-south routes or something like that. But just so you all know, the transportation system plan update will basically reevaluate sort of these existing priorities. And so the list that we have that was incorporated into the 2016 strategic plan, now that we've gone through this new transportation system planning process, basically we're kind of not starting fresh. We want to build on existing work, but I think, that list of prioritized projects could look different than if we weren't going through the transportation system plan update, if that makes sense. So, we might be choosing from a different sort of set of projects. And I agree with you. We would definitely want to look at, kind of spacing that work out geographically or by some other metric. But we're likely going to be working with a whole new list of projects, some of which will be the same that have been on the list for a long time, and some of which will be in a completely different order. And so basically this transportation system plan update is kind of a refresh of a planning process that's been extending from 2004. And so we'll have a new project list to come out of that we'll be picking from.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you both. Commissioner Ramos.
Yes, thank you. So I guess just in considering future projects, my question is, has the City Council adopted a climate action plan or some kind of sustainability policy? And then when we talk about future projects, spending more time on like how we are looking at the needs and the climate impact in terms of like behavior changes, reductions of emissions and whatnot. I guess that would be it.
Yeah, that's a great question, Eduardo. And or I'm sorry, oh, you're Commissioner Ramos. I'm sorry. So yes, the council is working on a climate strategy. They have not adopted a climate action plan. But they are looking to make recommendations around how we prioritize different things from a climate perspective. Similarly, and this actually relates to Commissioner Reyes' question as well, as we're looking to develop that priority list of projects to implement in the future, I think the TSP consultant has mentioned our equity analysis for the TSP. And so we'll be using this kind of equity lens, this equity framework to help prioritize those projects too. So, the previous question kind of asked about what is that list? What do we do next? And I think the climate strategy and the equity analysis will inform what's the order of that list, who determines that list, how do we determine that list? And so definitely I think you'll see a lot of action from City Council over the next few months around a climate strategy, as well as an equity analysis, at least as it relates to the TSP. And then likely future planning processes will also include their own equity analyses, like the upcoming comprehensive plan update. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, just in future considerations, like I actively choose to take the bus all the way to the southwest region of the Portland Metro. So, it's like there's a need of parking, but then also how can we change that car-centric mindset, and representing the public transit section of our population. So I just wanted to bring that to the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I want to do a quick time check. We went a little bit over on our agenda in terms of public testimony. I also think we're having good discussion. I don't want to cut it off. So I kind of wanted to put it back to the commission. David, do we need to do a formal vote on that, or could we just do like a thumbs up, thumbs down on if we want to continue the discussion?
Well, Chair, there's no, in terms of what your bylaws state in terms of how this is set up, the timeframes that are put there are just for your own use as sort of guardrails. If you want to keep a meeting going longer on any point of discussion, that's within your purview. You don't need to vote on that. That's kind of just how the body is feeling about any particular point in time.
Okay. I would just like to quickly get a check from all the commissioners. Are we feeling like we continue some discussion, or would we like to move forward with the meeting? If you want to just do a thumbs up, thumbs down.
Oh, what's the thumbs up mean?
Thumbs up to continue, thumbs down. Okay. Thanks.
Is there more discussion? I mean, are we done?
I think Commissioner Hardy had a comment, which we can close out with if that's the last one, definitely. Or I don't know if anybody else. If you have something you want to say, maybe do a thumbs up, and if you're good, maybe do a thumbs down.
Wasn't this meeting going to 6:30?
Yeah, but we also have some staff communication.
Oh, okay.
Allotted for.
I would just note, but I'll give it over to Ms. Hardy. I don't see the point in reading into the record something that's already been submitted as written form. I mean, gosh, a couple of months ago, didn't we get a stack this thick of written stuff? So that seems rather redundant to me. It's all part of the record. I think it's our role to read these things. So that you shave a few minutes off.
Chair, could I respond to that?
Please.
So, yeah, anything that you receive as written testimony or written comments, those will be compiled and kept as part of the record. There is no specific requirement that you openly read something into the record. The only time you may want to approach something in that manner is, say you have a meeting and somebody hands you a written statement, you're right as the meeting starts and says, I can't say this, but I want this to be my testimony. You may have the option at that point, because it's not been received in time to distribute to everybody, to all the members. But really reading it would be just a way of making sure that all the members hear it. If things are written and received in time to be distributed to all the members, there's no reason to read that into the record. So I kind of agree with that sentiment. Thank you.
Commissioner Hardy.
I just want to reflect back on a few things. Commissioner Williams talked about the difference between safety, the concern of safety versus parking. And there also seems to be a real concern around, bike availability and bike use. But in listening to the public comment, I do think that if we're going to say safety, we really need to make sure there's real transparency around data and accidents and all that, if we're going to use that as a criteria, just a thought. And then the second thing is that what Commissioner Ramos said, and that's this tie-in to the climate action. The city is looking at climate action, but they've kind of put it into basic, stretch, bold, and leading edge. And the Cascadia consulting firm is going to be presenting at the city council meeting on the 22nd. And they're really looking to propose just the stretch and the bold, but there's a really strong input from the public that we are really beyond stretch, and we should be looking at bold and leading edge. So what Commissioner Ramos said is, what direction is the city council going and what steps do they take? And then how do we tie into that? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardy. Do we have any other commissioner communication that anyone wants to put forward? Commissioner Ramos?
Yeah, just before we wrap up here, I want to thank you, Chair McKenzie. I think you've done an excellent job of keeping us on time, and just the meeting has flown great, and I really appreciate that, and the structure that has been added to the meeting, setting time for us to ask our questions and make our comments. So thank you.
I think the same. Thank you.
Thank you both. And thank you to the city for helping with the structure. I think it's only going to get better as we all keep working together. With that, I do want to bring us back. We do have some absences that I'm going to ask for a motion to excuse if somebody would make that motion.
I'll make the motion to excuse the members that aren't here.
Thank you, Commissioner Herman. Do we have a second?
A point of order, was that for Freyer and, sorry, who was the other one that was the note?
Thank you.
So
yeah.
we have, I believe, and city staff, please correct me if this is not right, but we have excused absences for Commissioner Freyer and Commissioner Payne, and then we had an unanticipated absence for Commissioner Valenta.
Okay. I hadn't heard the latter point.
So do I need to restate my motion to excuse Commissioner Freya, Commissioner, I don't know, to excuse.
May I share something? We knew, I did, Chair McKenzie, did you hear from Commissioner Valenta?
No, so I'm saying that absence was we weren't aware of that, and then we were aware ahead of time of the other two.
So are we deciding to excuse the two we knew about as well as the one that we didn't hear about? I'm not sure of the motion.
I guess I would turn that back to the city. So my understanding is that we need to make a decision to excuse unanticipated absences, and then I think that with the absences we were aware of, the city is willing to excuse those absences. So if that's not right, let me know. I think we just need to motion to excuse Commissioner Valenta.
David, can you help us with that? How the excusing of someone we didn't hear from goes?
Yeah, let me grab the bylaws here real quick.
Okay.
And meetings.
If you're not going to make the meeting, I believe you're supposed to notify us.
So Chair, the section on attendance that's contained in your bylaws states attendance is expected. Any member anticipating absence should notify the chairperson or the division, long-range planning division, in advance. Any absence may be excused by the commission, even an extended period, However, unexcused absences from 3 consecutive regular meetings shall be reported to the city council for appropriate action. I would give you my opinion that certainly those who have complied with the requirement that they notify the chairperson or the long range planning division in advance of an absence should have their absence excused. At the absence of anyone who hasn't done that, it's really at your discretion. Having one unexcused absence isn't going to get somebody removed from the commission. 3 unexcused in a row, we'll just report that to the council for their action. Certainly, if you wanted to excuse those who provided advance notice, that would seem appropriate. And then it's up to you how you want to handle somebody who did not provide any notice. So you may want to deal with those separately, or.
I'm going to restate my motion to excuse all 3 members. Commissioner Valenta is a student and is has significant pressure on him, especially I think it's his senior year. So I want to be conscious of that and excuse all 3 members from the meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Herman. Do we have a second for that motion to excuse all 3 commissioners?
I'll second that, Commissioner Ruggles.
Thank you, Commissioner Ruggles. Jan or city staff, can we take a roll call vote to excuse those absences, please, if there's no further discussion?
Yes.
And if
Commissioner
there
Hart.
is any further discussion, feel free to just raise a hand.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Commissioner
Jan.
Hardy.
Yes, sorry.
Commissioner Jackson.
Aye.
Commissioner McKenzie.
Aye.
Commissioner Rea.
Yes.
Commissioner Ramos.
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Yes.
Commissioner Ruggles.
Yes.
And Commissioner Herman.
Yes.
Thank you. Anna, if you're saying something, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, I was talking to my husband, sorry.
No worries. With that, the absences will be excused, and I'm gonna move back to city staff to close out the meeting with staff communication.
I just had one quick item. I know Commissioner Ramos had asked about the term limits, and I am sorry, we are still working on clarifying the term limits. There were some questions from council around the term limits, and so we will get those finalized and to you as soon as possible. Just a quick update.
This is a way to keep us on forever, right?
That's the strategy. This is a life term. This is like the Supreme Court. I don't know if you knew, but.
All right, do we have any additional staff communication? Okay, and David, as a quick point of order, I saw something in the documents that were provided to me in advance of chairing this meeting. I just wanted to clarify, do we need a motion to adjourn the meeting, or do I just adjourn the meeting?
Chair, you can go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Typically what I suggest is you just query the group, like if there's no objections, this meeting will be adjourned, and you can just pause, and if anyone has something to add, and then you can say, okay, meeting adjourned.
So our next meeting is on April 6th, just as a point of clarification. April 6th. Okay.
Yeah, and I have a question. It looks like on the calendar there's a retreat. Are we still doing a retreat in April, or am I not?
That's a good question. And so Jennifer Compost will be back on Monday. And so I think that was sort of her idea that we would have a retreat. And so we'll clarify with her and get back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for bearing with me as I temporarily stepped in the chair role for this meeting. Do we have any further discussion before we adjourn the meeting?
From me.
All right, thank you everyone. With no further discussion, this meeting of the Transportation and Mobility Commission is adjourned. Have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.